Hello, and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about the whole "you should just be over it by now" myth, message that we get in our culture, especially when we are talking about our adverse childhood experiences and the upset and the pain that we may have experienced based on what we went through in our childhood. Okay? So, in our culture, we are now living in a world where therapy and therapy speak and understanding our childhoods and understanding that our childhoods affected us and all of these things is definitely becoming more mainstream than ever before, right? We can absolutely say with certainty that it's trendy now, absolutely. And so we know that this, generally speaking, is a pretty good thing, right? In the past, there was essentially no recognition at all that what happened to us in our childhoods may have affected us in our adulthoods. And this has led to a lot of people feeling like they are broken, they are bad, they are wrong, they are shameful for their coping mechanisms, for the way they self-sabotage, for the ways that they live or feel like they can't find their purpose or find meaning in life, for the ways that they struggle, for their addictions, for their mental health, and all of this stuff. And this has led to a wellness world that has deeply capitalized on this idea that we are just kind of like blank slates throughout our childhood, and then we arrive in our adulthood, and if there's anything wrong in our adulthoods, if we have any bad habits, if we have any incapacity to just go along and get along with how we're supposed to live, that's a you problem. You need to deal with it. There's something wrong with you. You need to fix yourself. And that has been incredibly painful, right? Like, we know that has been really, really hard for a lot of people. And for generations, people have literally just felt like they were terrible, broken, wrong, shameful individuals who couldn't get their shit together and who just, right, showed up in their adulthoods and decided to fuck up their lives. And now, with this new awareness that we are starting to cultivate as a culture, that hey, it might not be that you just arrive at 18 fully capable of living a completely balanced, awesome, harmonious life, and if you don't, you're just making bad choices. Maybe this isn't the case. Maybe the ways that we were treated when we were children has an impact on the way that we are as adults. Maybe our mental health has an impact on our way that we are as adults. Maybe the conditions that we grew up in, so not necessarily even like how our caregivers treated us or anything like this, but the backgrounds that we have, just the socioeconomic backgrounds, the educational background, the ways that we were, the religious backgrounds, like all of these things have an impact on who we become and have an impact on the kind of lives we are capable of creating for ourselves. And this has been an incredible awareness, and this has been incredibly helpful for us. And I think that I really hope that this continues forward, because it is such an important thing for us to understand that we don't just arrive in our adulthoods as blank slates, completely capable of having a perfectly successful life within the context of what that is in our culture, and we just choose to fuck it up. That is not reality. Yes? And in my mystery school, in my coaching, we do so much work around what you were raised to believe about yourself and about the world. The shame, guilt, blame stories that you have adopted about yourself that are wrong and that deeply affect and impact how you are going to be able to function in society, how you're going to function in your relationships, how you're going to function in your work. We unpack all of these things because they have such a huge impact on the choices we are capable of making, on our perceptions and what we think is possible for ourselves and not, and especially a huge impact on how we deal with the things that hurt and our pain and our emotions, which tend to lead to the self-sabotage, the coping mechanisms, the numbing, the stimulating, all the things that we do that we then have shame and guilt about, that we think are bad and wrong habits that we just need to get rid of. It's we start to understand, like, no, we have a reason why we are doing these things. There is a very real reason why we do these things. And so much of the time, that reason is founded in our childhoods and what happened to us growing up. And so this is why this work is so important. This is why my mystery school is 5 years long. This is why the coaching work I do is the coaching work I do, is that we work on validating that you did not just show up in your adulthood and decide to start fucking up your life, that you are doing the best you can with what you were raised within. Okay? So we are getting that. And that is amazing. That is perfect. That is beautiful. And like I said, I hope that that continues. However, there is still a very real cultural narrative that I think a lot of us have experienced in our lives, which is, sure, you had a terrible childhood. Yeah, your parents were bad to you. Yeah, you suffered this or that trauma or adverse experience. Okay, we can validate that, we can acknowledge it, but shouldn't you be over it by now? Right? You've done 6 months of therapy, or you've read Complex CPSD by Pete Walker, and you've had some time of letting yourself be upset about it, or maybe you have an awareness of it, and that's great, and you understand it, but you need to take responsibility for yourself. You can't just let your childhood be your excuse for why you're not getting your shit together. And especially like what we talked about in the last video, which was, it wasn't even that bad for you, right? Lots of people can even say things like that like, whatever, you weren't starved, you weren't actually physically beaten, or, people had it way worse than you and they're doing so much better than you. Shouldn't you be over this by now? And I think that this is one of the most painful things that is coming at us in our world today, when we are trying to process our histories and what happened to us and how those experiences have affected us, is this idea that there's this time limit on how long it is appropriate to be processing that, and what getting over it is supposed to look like. Yeah? Because I think a lot of us are facing the very real expectation of culture around us. Again, that, okay, you can do your therapy. You can acknowledge that your upbringing was not the best. You can realize that your parents hurt you. That's all fine and good. But you're still supposed to. Yes? Key thing here. You're still supposed to get over it at some point and become successful by society standards. You're still supposed to have a stable, respectable career. You're still supposed to have a loving, forgiving, gracious relationship with your caregivers. You're still supposed to partner up and get married and have the 2.5 kids. You're still supposed to have the house. You're still supposed to have the money and the luxury. You're still supposed to have perfect health. You're still supposed to have perfect mental health and be totally balanced and have the perfect morning routine. You see, it doesn't matter what you went through. It doesn't matter what your childhood was like. It doesn't matter the adverse experience. Yes, do your therapy. Yes, acknowledge that your history wasn't that great, and then pull yourself up by your bootstraps and become successful within culture. That's still the narrative, and that's still the expectation. That everyone can have success by society standards, and that you should, and that these are still the expectations, and that if you are doing your therapy work right, if you are doing your healing work right, that is supposed to be the ultimate outcome. That you're over it, you have a great relationship with your caregivers, you have a perfect career, you've partnered up, you have a healthy life, and you're thriving now. Thriving by cultural standards. You should just be over it by now. And getting over it means fitting into culture. Okay. This is what I want to unpack in today's video. Because the reality of what it means to actually process our childhoods is something very, very, very different than what most people think it is. So that's number one. And the reality of the outcomes that we can expect when we have processed our childhoods tend to be very different than what culture expects. Okay, so number one, what is the reality of processing your childhood and the adverse experiences you've been through? The reality of this is, and I'm going to say this right now, it takes as long as it takes. It takes as long as it takes. It's not a 6-month project. It's not a 1-year project. For some of us, we will be dealing with the ramifications of how we were raised and how we were raised impacted us for the rest of our lives. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is in a minute. But that first thing I want you to understand is that for some of us, we may never get to a place where thinking about our childhoods is not painful anymore. Where it's completely neutral, we've completely forgiven, and there's no emotional anything about it. Some of us have had such adverse traumatic experiences in our childhoods that to think that we're just going to get to a place where we are completely neutral about it is an unreasonable expectation. For some of us, what processing our childhood looks like is learning the skills and the tools that we need so that when the pain comes up, we know how to support ourselves through it. That we're gonna get triggered, we're gonna have memories, we might have flashbacks, and these things are deep in our nervous systems. And we may never be able to get to a place where it's fully neutral and we have no emotion about it. Rather, hopefully we can gain the tools to be able to have compassion for ourselves, to be able to have curiosity around what it is that we're feeling and what we need to get through those hard moments so that they don't have to take over our entire lives. Okay? So that's the first thing. To expect yourself, if you had an incredibly painful childhood where you were deeply abused, where you were manipulated, where your sense of safety was completely robbed from you, where you never felt safe, or you never felt like it was okay to be who you were, or you got the message over and over and over again that you were shameful, wrong, bad, and guilty. If you were physically abused, if you were abused in any other way, we need to release the expectation that you are supposed to one day get to a place where that never hurts again to think about. or where nothing ever triggers that again. Okay? When we go through deeply painful things, when we go through things in our childhoods that make us feel deeply unsafe, which is what adverse childhood experiences really boil down to. They make us feel like we are not going to be okay. Because remember, from the childhood perspective, we don't know that we're going to survive. We don't know that we're going to one day eventually get to a place where we can get out of the situation that we're in, where we're no longer going to be abused, where we can put up boundaries, where we can move away, where we can have different opportunities. From our childhood perspective, whatever's happening in our childhoods is reality, and it's what reality is always going to be. So if that reality is deeply unsafe, if it's harmful, if it's hurtful, that's going to get stored in your nervous system very deeply. That you are not safe and the world is not a safe place. That you are not good. That you are shameful, wrong, bad, and guilty and the cause of all of this pain. That's going to be programmed in on such a deep level that even when we get to adulthood and we do our processing work and we work to be able to become the witness and we work to be able to validate and soothe that inner child part and we work to be able to show up for ourselves in our triggers currently and to orient to the fact that we're adults now, that we have power now, that we can get out of those flashback states and all that stuff, it doesn't mean that nervous system trauma is going to be completely eliminated. Okay? So first things first is to understand that for some of us, the pain of our childhood is going to last forever to a degree. So again, this doesn't mean that it's going to be as painful as it is right now forever. It doesn't mean that we can't get to a place where we become less triggered by life, where we can find relative safety and experience more moments of feeling safe and more moments of feeling in our adult perspective and more moments of that expanded adult awareness as we incrementally heal. Okay? We can make massive progress to the point where it's almost like those adverse experiences become things that we can pretty quickly recognize that are coming up, and we can develop such strong tools to help us move through them that they don't completely derail our day or our week or our month. But for some of us, that pain is just going to be there forever. And there is no shame in that. And that is not your fault. And that is not because you're doing something wrong. And rather, again, it just means that for some of us, we're just going to have to learn, what do I need when those things come up to feel loved and supported and safe and to bring myself back into my adult perspective and to orient and to do all of this stuff so that those moments don't have to become days and weeks and months. Okay? But that expectation that you're supposed to just get over it to the point where it never affects you or bothers you ever again, not realistic and not reality for some of us. For some of us, it will, right? For some of us, we're going to be able to process to a point where it doesn't hurt anymore to think about. For some of us, we're going to be able to get to a point where we forgive and it's kind of over. And we just live our adult lives and we're not triggered the way we used to be triggered and it doesn't affect us the way that it used to. But this is a highly individual thing. And I believe that the most self-loving thing we can do for ourselves is to just validate that wherever we are right now, however we're still being affected and impacted by our caregivers and by our childhoods, is where we are. it's legit, it makes sense, and that we just need to show up for that, okay? Instead of turning this into a new thing that we have shame about, or that we tell ourselves, well, I should be over this by now. I've been processing it and feeling it and doing my work and having compassion for myself and all of these things. Shouldn't I be over it by now? Every time my clients tell me that, my reply is, if you're not, you're not. There's no fighting with reality. If you're not, you're not. And other people telling you that you should be over it, or you telling you that you should feel different by now, that you shouldn't still be being affected the way that you are, is fighting with reality. And we don't get anywhere by fighting with reality. Telling yourself that you should be over it by now is not going to change how you feel. Telling someone else that they should be over it by now is not going to change how they feel. It is not a healing technique. Okay? As much as we might want to believe that if I just tell myself enough, I should be over this, that's going to change something magically so that we are over it, it's not. When we are not over it, the only way forward that has any grounding or basis in reality is to say, okay, I'm not. So what do I need to be and feel supported in this moment? Okay, if you take nothing else from this video, that is the key takeaway I want you to take away. There is no getting over it by telling yourself you should be over it. There is no taking away your sadness, taking away the deep, aching, hollow feeling in your heart, taking away the anger and resentment by telling yourself, it wasn't that bad, I should be over it by now, I've been doing my processing work, why is this still here? Right? We say these things to ourselves because, of course, it hurts to feel these things. We don't want to feel these things. We want to make it go away. But these messages, saying these things to ourselves, doesn't make it go away. It's just a way that we invalidate ourselves. And when we are invalidating ourselves within our experience, that is how we keep ourselves stuck. Okay? So literally, in every single one of my coaching sessions, in everything in the mystery school, in all of these videos, the main message is, if you really want to move forward, the only way forward is to acknowledge and validate that you're not over it, that you still have these feelings, that they are there. And so what do you need to feel supported and validated in working through them? That is the only way to actually make any kind of progress. All right? So the I should just be over it by now. Shouldn't I just be over it by now? Is there something wrong with me that I'm not over it? Everyone else seems to be getting on with their lives. What's wrong with me that I can't? None of this helps. None of this actually moves the needle in terms of making us feel better. It's just a way that we shame ourselves and the way that culture has taught us to shame ourselves. And again, right, it's this idea that if I invalidate myself enough, I'll feel different. It's not going to work. You cannot invalidate yourself enough to make yourself feel different. So where you are is where you are. And what we need in every single one of those moments where we're struggling with what we've been through is validation, and then compassion, and what do I need right now? Okay? Next thing. We are going to need to process and just puke out the anger and puke out the sadness and be sad and be angry for as long as we need to. There is no textbook, this is how long it takes to process the emotions of this. That's some gold standard that we can apply to every human. It's different for all of us. Okay? I literally went through a period where I was starting to recognize just how painful my childhood was, and all the shame and the guilt and all the stuff that I had carried around for so long. And I started to get into this really deep, like, whoa, no, it's not me. I'm not broken. Things were really messed up for me growing up. And I cried every day for like 6 months. Every day. Every single day. And there were many, many days during that time where I told myself, holy shit, you're never going to get out of this, right? That feeling of I'm always going to feel this way, this deep rage at my caregivers, this deep sadness, this deep ache that my childhood was so painful and I didn't have a secure connection and my caregivers didn't love me the way that I needed them to. And all the ways that abandonment like really messed up my life. Physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally. There was so much grief and so much anger that I really, really thought I was never going to stop crying. And that the depths of that pain was going to last forever. But what I can tell you from my own experience and from every individual I've ever worked with is that time of the real intense processing will not last forever. And the way we can make it as short as possible is by allowing it to be what it is. The best way through it is to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. And I have to just allow this to be how I'm feeling right now. I just need to say, right? This is a phase in my life where I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm going to do as much as I need to do to keep myself alive and keep going. And then I'm going to be sad and I'm going to be crying and I'm going to be processing. And I'm not going to be, making huge strides in my career. And I'm not going to be doing all of these other big, amazing things. Because this is a phase in my life I need to go through where this is coming up and I'm in the puke phase. And I know that's a kind of gross metaphor. But this is how I see it, right? It's very much like we drank a lot of poison as children in our adverse childhood experiences. We took in a lot of poison. And sometimes the only remedy for that is to get it out. And to let it come out. And it's going to come out, 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 and it's going to feel like we're energetically vomiting every day. And then we're just kind of stuck in it. And it's not going to feel great. But I promise you again, this is not going to last forever. that as we just give ourselves permission to feel those feelings, as we give ourselves permission to be in that state of getting it out, that is how we process. Okay? And like I said, I know that sometimes it's going to feel like we're going to be stuck in that forever. Like that grief and that anger is never going to go away or never going to get less. It's going to be intense and it's going to be there forever. But I promise you that it won't. And the more that you allow for it, to the degree that your nervous system is capable. Okay, so that's the other thing. I really want to make it clear that you don't have to be in a constant state of processing when you're doing this. Like when you're going through that really acute, intense phase, I really want you to be mindful of scheduling in breaks to just mindlessly scroll on your phone, or to watch TV, or to do something to get your mind off of it every once in a while. Because we don't want to be forcing ourselves to try to process it all right here, right now, because that can just be re-traumatizing. Okay, so we want to have a reasonable level of allowing ourselves to process those emotions every day without feeling like that's all we're allowed to do. Okay, so there needs to be a balance of giving yourself reasonable breaks while you go through that period. Okay? Finding little things that you enjoy or that at least take your mind off of it for a couple of hours a day. That's really important. Okay? And then the second metaphor I have of this is, for a lot of us, because our adverse childhood experiences put us into such a survival mode, a lot of us became real fighters. We became really independent. We became really strong. We became really I can just get through this. Just keep pushing forward. Just keep achieving things. Keep doing things. And we go get to this place where we learn how to push ourselves really hard as a way of trying to escape our situation, as a way of trying to earn love, as a way of trying to get safe. We become the mobilizer type. Or we become the freeze, numb out, I just shut down type. And both of these things is like getting injured and then running on those broken legs. Right? It's literally like breaking your legs and then running on those broken legs for years. Right? So the mobilizers who became fighters, and I'm just going to keep pushing and I'm going to keep accomplishing, and a lot of the time, it's what saved your life. You had to do that. In order to get to a new situation where you were relatively safe, in order to get out of your old situation, you had to fight. You had to run on those broken legs, which means your body went into a state where you didn't perceive the pain. Or you learned how to numb so much that you didn't perceive the pain. Right? You think that you have a problem with self-sabotage and not being able to get your life together because you binge food or you binge Netflix, or you can't get yourself to be, motivated and moving forward all the time because you keep wasting your time, and you think no. That's how you have been running on your two broken legs and not feeling it. You either pushed yourself or you learned how to numb and suppress it. And both of these things have helped you not feel the pain. You either have felt like when that pain comes up, it's okay, I can fight it, I can fix myself, I can improve myself, I can change. Or when that pain comes up, you learned how to numb. You learned how to shut it off. You learned how to check out. So then when we start to do this work, now all of a sudden, we're feeling all of these things we never felt before. So we're going to either lose the capacity to keep pushing, and we're going to think my life is going to fall apart. I'm not able to tap into that like fighter tiger me because I'm sad and I'm angry and I'm having all these emotions, and we're going to feel like we're losing control. And what I'm going to say to you is probably the only reason that that is coming up right now is because you are in a place of relative safety where you can. And now you're going to feel like you're laying in that hospital bed with the casts over your legs. And now you're feeling all that pain of having run on 2 broken legs for so long. And you have to just sit there and feel the pain instead of being able to distract yourself with fighting and achieving and changing and fixing. And it's going to feel awful. But again, it's part of the healing process, right? And then with the people who numb and self-sabotage and cope, when you learn the tools of witnessing, why am I numbing out right now? Why am I self-sabotaging? Why am I coping? Why am I using these substances? Why am I doing all these things? You're going to start to realize, oh, it's because there's pain there. And this is how I'm avoiding feeling that pain. And so you're going to start to feel it, and it's going to feel awful. So I want you to know that that's normal. Okay? And then the next thing that's really important to understand is that the habits that we learned in terms of how we interact in relationships, right? Our codependency, our hyper-independence, our inability to deeply connect with other people, how we learn to think about ourselves based on our childhood experiences. I'm a piece of shit. I can't ever get myself together. This is not okay. The deep fears we have in our body, right? So like the real pain we have around trying to rest and how deeply scary that can be for a lot of us. Or the trauma we have around certain things. The ways that we have been trying to fix and improve ourselves since childhood, right? The obsessions with our bodies, the obsessions with achievement, the obsession with the not being able to know what I'm supposed to do with my life and not knowing what I love to do, and the people pleasing and all of these things. These are deeply ingrained habits at this point. So yes, we're going to do that emotional processing. We're going to feel it. It's going to be awful. We're going to get validated, right? So this, again, to kind of wrap that up. In those pain moments, in the vomit moments, in the I'm sitting in the hospital bed and feeling the pain of all of this, the thing we need is validation. The remedy for that is, it wasn't my fault. I never asked for this. I am not shameful, bad, wrong, broken. And how can I be on my own side? How can I just say, yeah, you never should have been treated that way. I'm so sorry. That was not okay. It was not your fault. You did not deserve it. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to not forgive them right now. That's what we need in that phase. Validation. It's not about taking responsibility for yourself. It's not about seeing it in a higher perspective. It's not about having compassion for your caregivers and trying to understand where they were coming from. In that deep, dark pain, we just need validation for our experience. And that can be really hard, right? I know a lot of us have a really hard time validating our experience. We want to jump to, no, I'm broken and I should just be different. Or, no, it's still just me being fucked up. Or, I need to have compassion for them. And I need to center their experience. And me being mad at them is upsetting them. So I need to stop. Or other people are getting uncomfortable, so I need to stop. Right? We're going to have all of that. And I'm just here to remind you, no. You just need to be loved and respected in the pain and the process. And it's not your fault. And you didn't deserve it. And how you're feeling right now makes sense. Even if it doesn't make sense to you right now. right? Even if you're thinking, it wasn't that bad, I'm overreacting. No, you're not. There's no such thing as overreacting. You're reacting to the degree that it actually impacted you. So it's your job to understand why it impacted you like that and what you need to feel validated and loved and safe. Okay? And that is how we start to deal with this next phase, which is many of us are still being affected because we still have relationships with our caregivers. Many of us are still being affected because a lot of the things that happened because of our childhoods are now deeply ingrained habits that are messing up our lives in certain ways, right? They are deeply impacting our relationships. They're deeply impacting our capacity to get through a day and work and interact and know who we are. We have deeply ingrained habits of self-sabotage and self-fixing and numbing and coping. We have a mess in our lives now that we didn't make. So to think we're just going to get over it is unrealistic because we're still being affected. It's not that it's just in the past and now it's over and everything's fine. Otherwise, you wouldn't be dealing with this. You would just be living your perfectly successful, awesome, feeling, high vibe life. Right? You're still being affected. It's a mess in your life now that you have to clean up, that you didn't make. And therefore, you're not going to just get over it. So we're going to go through learning how to validate ourselves, learning how to have compassion for ourselves, and what do I need, and why am I hurting, and what hurt about what I went through, and what did I actually feel if it wasn't my fault, or if I wasn't the cause, or if I'm not just bad and wrong and broken and shitty now, that I have my bad habits and the areas where I can't get my shit together. But what am I actually feeling? What was I feeling when I wasn't safe and I wasn't supported? Where are all these parts of myself that have been relegated to the shadows because I learned that they were bad and wrong and shameful, that I now need to reintegrate and rediscover and learn how to embody? And what are all these messages I got about who and what I'm supposed to be that aren't true? And all the ways that I'm coping with the pain of this. How am I going to deal with that now? Right? How am I going to learn new strategies of getting my needs met when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm sad, when I'm scared, when I'm angry? How am I going to learn how to put up boundaries where I never knew that I could before? How am I going to learn to step into my adult perspective and not blame myself, and to problem solve and to do all of these things? This is long-term work. Actually cleaning up the mess that our caregivers made for us, right? When we realize I have all of these negative habits, not because I'm a shitty person, but it's because how I was raised, this is how I had to adapt. This is how I coped. These are the behaviors that I came up with. These are the faulty perspectives and perceptions that I've had. These are the ways that I sabotage myself because I don't feel safe to be myself. We're going to realize that it's had a big impact on our day-to-day life. And so we don't just get over it. Now we have to go through this whole process of figuring out how to be different in the world from a new foundation. And that is very difficult to do, right? Because getting over your childhood isn't just forgiving what happened. It's also having to now deal with all the consequences of that, all of the outcomes of what we went through and what we were trained to believe and all of this stuff and all the habits we have now. That is hard work. And changing those things is not easy. Getting to a place where we can figure out what we need, where we can start to set boundaries, where we can learn to upset people and be okay, where we can learn to embrace who we really are and express that, even when people don't like it, where we can learn how to cope less and feel our feelings and process them and show up for ourselves more. This is a long process. And that's what it actually takes to heal from our childhoods. It's not just processing it, it's then having to create a whole new life a lot of the time. A whole new perspective of yourself and reality. You see? To actually clean up the mess we didn't make. You're not just gonna have a couple of weeks of crying about how your childhood was terrible and then be a whole new different person who's completely motivated and able to be, advocate for yourself in relationships and who knows exactly what you want to do and just feels free to be that in the world. That's not how that works. Actually having to unpack your whole childhood and then figure out how that's impacting you now. And then doing the slow, steady, nervous system-based work of learning how to be different in the world. Literally having to reparent ourselves is not easy. And we don't just get over it. Okay? Because, again, what most people think getting over it is just feeling sad about it or feeling angry about it and then forgiving and forgetting. But they're completely neglecting the fact that you now have all this stuff in your adult life that you have to clean up. Right? The thing that is hurting you about your childhood is not just the fact that it happened, but it's the fact that it now impacts your day-to-day life. It impacts your day-to-day life. And working through changing that stuff is hard, right? So for instance, with me, the amount of neglect that I experienced have led to chronic health issues that I might never, ever be able to fix. And it has a massive impact on how I am able to live my life. If I had been treated sooner, if I had been understood sooner, if I had been taken care of, I might not be having to deal with chronic illness the way that I am now. And that hurts. I am still upset about that. On the days where I'm in a flare-up and I have had to be so strict and do everything right and not be able to do a lot of the things that I wish that I could do because my health literally won't allow me to do it, and I still have a flare-up, and now I'm suffering, there's pain there. Because it could have been different. It didn't have to be this bad, and now it impacts me, and I might never recover. I might never get to live the life I really want to live. And that's a mess I didn't make. So the reality is, in healing from my childhood, I know how to no longer shame and blame and guilt myself about it. I no longer believe that I am just fucking myself over like I used to. I now have lots of tools to be able to feel better, but it still impacts me. There are still times where I'm codependent and I don't stand up for myself and I don't value what I want and I let people walk all over me. And that's not a choice I made. I didn't decide one day to be like that. I learned that that's how I had to be in order to be loved. So changing that, learning how to stand up for myself, learning how to disappoint people, learning that people can abandon me and leave me and I can be okay, is hard work. And again, it's a mess I didn't make. I didn't do this to myself. But now it impacts me on a day-to-day basis. And that sucks. So you see, it's the dealing with the consequences of what we went through that is the real healing work and the getting over it. And that is hard and it takes time. And like I say, some things we might never fully recover from. And that has to be acknowledged. And that's real. And so we're allowed to be upset about that. And then finally, for some of us, we still have our caregivers in our lives. And for some of us, we're still being harmed by them to this day. We're still being triggered and invalidated and told that who we are is not okay. And we're still trying to get them to understand us and get them to approve of us and all of this stuff. And so we're cyclically going through these periods of feeling sad about it and then trying to get over it and then feeling sad about it and trying to, because it's still happening. Right? It's not that it's in the past. It's that we're still literally being affected by these things. And that's a whole other ball of wax to deal with, right? For some of us, we are going to need to take space from our caregivers who aren't able to be there for us, who aren't able to show up for us. And for some of us, it might not be forever, right? Some of us do get to a place where we can re-establish contact with our caregivers and we can have boundaries and we understand what it was that hurt us about them and we understand all the parts of ourselves we rejected because of them and we learn how to embrace those things and be them anyways, even when our caregivers don't understand or don't validate or can't support. And some of us are going to go through an experience of, I can't have a relationship with them. And part of the healing is learning to say, they put their cigarette out on my leg every time I hang out with them, and there just is no stopping it. And so again, right, culture telling us that you should just become this person who's fully functional within society the way that society says you're supposed to be functional and has a great relationship with your caregivers, and especially spirituality and self-help that tell us you're supposed to forgive. And that forgiveness means forgetting and then letting them back in your life. That's not reality for some of us. That's not always appropriate. That's not always healthy. That's not always healing. Sometimes the best thing we're going to do for ourselves is to say, I can't have a relationship with you. You don't want to see the way that you're harming me. You don't want to change. You just want me to become okay with the abuse. And I'm not going to. And therefore, we can't interact. Some of us are going to just have to have very, very, very strong boundaries with our caregivers, where we don't really tell them things about ourselves. We right? And this is the other thing, right? Learning to no longer see our caregivers as a source. And getting to a place where we can just see them as people. And then, do I want to have a relationship with these people? Versus, well, I owe them because they're my caregivers, or I have to forgive them because they're my caregivers, or I have to keep working to eventually earn their love and approval, and I have to get them to understand, and I have to get them to see that they hurt me and how they hurt me and why it hurt, and they have to change. Getting to a place where we can get past that is really hard. So the actual experience of getting over your childhood is not just being upset about it for a couple of weeks, reading a few books and being like, oh yeah, my childhood was shitty, and then getting over it. It's all this other stuff, because it impacted you and it shaped the way you live your life now. And so now you have to clean up a mess you didn't make, a mess that's deep in your nervous system. Right? Habits that were formed, belief systems that were formed before your frontal lobe was even developed. This is not simple stuff. And all the cultural narratives we have to get over and move past. And then finally accepting who we actually are and what we're actually capable of and who we want to be in the world, which may not align with what culture says we're supposed to be. That's the other big thing. Healing your childhood doesn't necessarily mean you're now going to be this ultra motivated, super productive, partnered, 2.5 kids, white picket fence, ultra healthy, living your life, having the beautiful morning routine. That's not what healing is for a lot of us. That's not what figuring out who you really are is going to look like for a lot of us. Many of us are just never going to be capable of that. And that's a reality we have to accept and embrace. That who we become as we heal our childhood trauma might not be who society or who we are expecting ourselves to become, or what we're expecting ourselves to be capable of, or what we're expecting ourselves to want or do or be. We have to be open to the idea that healing might turn into us becoming a version of ourselves we didn't even know we were going to be, and living a life that has compromises because of what we went through. Healing is going to look different for all of us based on the level of harm that happened and based on the circumstances that we're in and what we're capable of becoming and growing into and accessing, right? There's so many variables involved in this. And that is what we have to acknowledge and validate. So no, you shouldn't just be over it by now, because it's still impacting you. And you are worthy and valid of being upset, of letting yourself just experience your emotions without being told you should feel differently, because you shouldn't. And then that taking responsibility phase is hard and it's painful. And I hope that you can get support through these videos, through other people, through therapy, through coaching, through the mystery school, because it's hard and it takes time. And you have to clean up a mess you didn't make. And sometimes we can't fully clean it up. And so I wanted to acknowledge and validate the reality of all of that today. There's nothing wrong with you if it still hurts. There's nothing wrong with you if you're not over it. Please give yourself the time and the space and the grace. Okay? It's not your fault. You didn't deserve it. It's not because of you. And now you have to clean it up. And you can do it. But you need to be kind to yourself. Okay? Your parents may never see it. And that's really painful. Your caregivers may never apologize to you. They may never see how they harmed you. And that's so hard, right? Getting to a place where we can take care of ourselves even though our caregivers still gaslight us about it, still tell us it wasn't a big deal, still tell us it was our own fault. That's so hard, right? There are so many layers of this, and it's very deeply individual. So just don't let anyone tell you how it's supposed to look. It's going to be different for you than it is for everybody else, and you're valid and you're allowed. Okay? Okay. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. You're not messed up. You have to clean up a mess you didn't make, and it's not your fault. It takes as long as it takes. It takes as long as it takes. And the only thing that you really need is validation and how do I need to be supported. That is real reality. Okay? Okay. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.